There's a statue at Walt Disney World that not nearly enough people take pictures of. It's not at the center of the square or in front of the castle. It's off to the side on a park bench, right? It's a bronze man sitting quietly next to Minnie Mouse. And his name is on a little plaque, and most people walk right past him. But that man built the thing that they are walking through. And his name was Roy Oliver Disney. And I think he might be one of the greatest leaders who ever lived. And I mean that in total seriousness. And I'm going to spend the next 20-ish minutes proving it to you. And if you're new here, I'm Jen. I help small business owners lead other humans like a human. And today, I want to tell you the story of someone who spent his entire life making somebody else's dream come true. Not because he had to or because he didn't have his own options, but because he chose that role with his entire chest over and over again for 50 years. This is not the story of a sidekick. It's the story of a very strong number two. It's the story of one of the most powerful and most strategic and most quietly extraordinary human beings in American history. And barely anybody knows his name. And if you've ever been the person working hard behind the scenes while someone else got the credit, I really need you to hear this, because probably nobody has ever told the story the way that it actually happened. So let's talk about Roy. In 1923, Roy Disney was lying in a hospital bed in Arizona, recovering from tuberculosis. He was 28, he'd served in the Navy, he had a military disability pension, right? Not a lot of money, but it was something. And he was supposed to be resting and recovering and getting better. And then his little brother Walt showed up. Walt was 21 at the time, and he had an idea for a cartoon studio. He needed help, he needed money, he needed someone to believe that this was a real thing and not just another one of his schemes. And Roy left the hospital the very next morning. He never had a relapse. He took $200 from his disability pension, which was basically everything that he had, and he went to California with his little brother to start a cartoon company in a garage. There was no job description, no equity agreement, no 5-year plan. There was just Walt asking and Roy saying yes, as he always did. Now, I want you to think about what that actually is for a second, because it's not a business decision. It's a character decision, right? That's a person who is so fundamentally clear on who they are and what they care about that the calculation happens almost instantly, even from a hospital bed, even at personal risk and without knowing how it ends. The people in your life who show up like that, right, before the outcome is clear, before there's anything in it for them, those are the rarest humans that you will ever meet. And for small business owners right now who are building a team, if someone like that is in your building, everything else that you do as a leader should be organized around deserving that person. Because Roy didn't have to do any of what he did. He chose it. And that choice is the whole story. Here's the detail that I think about more than almost anything in this story. When they started, the studio was actually called Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio. It had both of their names, Walt and Roy. Equal partners in the thing that they built together, right? Roy was the one who suggested that they changed it. It was his idea, completely unprompted, and he proposed renaming it Walt Disney Studio, erasing his own name from the company that he co-founded because he understood that Walt's name on the door was worth more than his own name on the door. And I want to be really careful here, because the easy road of that is, oh, Roy was so selfless. And that is very true, but it also sells him short. Because what Roy actually did was make a strategic call that most people never have the ego security to make. He looked at the situation clearly and said, the mission is best served if I do this, so I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to need anyone to make a big deal about it. And I don't think that's martyrdom, right? I think that's mastery. And the people on your team who can make that call, right? Who put the work and the mission above their own credit without needing acknowledgement, without being asked, right? Those are the people worth fighting to keep, because that kind of clarity is genuinely rare and it tends to disappear when it doesn't feel valued. Roy made that decision in 1923. He never asked for the name back. By the mid-1930s, the studio was doing really well, right? Mickey Mouse was everywhere. The shorts they had were profitable. They had a very real operation. And then Walt decided that he wanted to make a feature film, a full-length animated feature, and nobody had ever done that. And the industry press called it Disney's folly. And it was going to cost more money than they had, taking longer than anyone thought, and there was no guarantee that audiences would even sit through an animated movie for that long. The whole thing could have sunk them. And Roy thought that it was an absolutely terrible idea. He told Walt that. He was absolutely not quiet about it. But then he went to the banks and raised the money anyway. And so while Walt was on set making Snow White, Roy was simultaneously reassuring all of the nervous bankers that everything was completely under control, while at the same time asking those same bankers for more money because the budget had blown past every projection. He had written to his parents during the production, and he said, "Anyways, that's life. You just have to keep on working and gambling. It's all a gamble." And that letter gets me every time because that's what real partnership looks like, right? It's not a blind agreement. Roy had genuine doubts and he expressed them, and then he made a choice. I trust this person more than I just trust this plan. And he went to work. Walt would later say it plainly. "You see, all my dreams might have remained just dreams if it hadn't been for my brother Roy. He made them real. He made the dream practical." Snow White was a massive hit, and it saved the studio and launched everything that came after. And so here's the question that this raises for your team. Do the people working for you trust you enough to go to the mat for something they personally have doubts about? Do they believe in you enough that your conviction can override their hesitation? That trust is never built in the moment that it's needed. It's built in every small interaction before that, right? In how you handle being wrong, in how you treat people when things are hard, in whether you make it safe to say, I'm really not sure about this. Roy trusted Walt because Walt had earned it over years, and that's the whole lesson. In 1963, Walt and Roy got into a fight that lasted 3 days. They were in Palm Springs, and the dispute was over Walt's compensation from a business deal, right? It was real money, real grievances, real anger. And by all accounts, it was super ugly, right? They screamed at each other. They said things that couldn't be unsaid. And then they didn't speak for months. And the company's future hung in the balance. These were the two men who had built something together for over 40 years. And for a minute, it felt like it might actually break. And then Roy walked into a negotiating room full of lawyers representing the other side. And he said this: "None of us would be here in these offices if it hadn't been for Walt. All of your jobs, all the benefits you have, all came from Walt and his contributions. He deserves better treatment than what's being shown here." And after 3 days of screaming at his brother, after months of not speaking, Roy walked into that room and went to bat for Walt anyway. And that's what it looks like to have the fight and the grace. Roy didn't choose between honesty and loyalty because he had both. He was honest enough to say what he thought for 3 straight days in Palm Springs, and he was loyal enough to show up for his brother when it actually mattered. And so that combination of fighting hard internally and then presenting a unified front for the mission is one of the rarest and most valuable things in any team or partnership. Roy and Walt didn't have a perfect relationship. They had a real one. And one of the things that made it real was that they figured out how to have the fight without it destroying everything. They had the conversation, the full ugly 3-day version of it, and then they chose the relationship and the mission over being right. That's what hard conversations in service of something real actually look like. If you're avoiding a hard conversation on your team right now because you don't know how to have it without blowing everything up, that's exactly what my workbook, Scripts for Hard Conversations, is designed for. It gives you the language for the moments that feel really impossible, right? The ones where the stakes are high and you just don't know how to start. Link is in the description. Now, Roy figured it out the hard way, but you don't have to. And now we're going to backtrack to the early 1950s when Walt had a new idea. a theme park. And naturally, Roy hated it. And this is one of my favorite parts of the whole story because it shows something really important about what Roy actually was, right? Because he was not a yes man. We know that by now. He wasn't the rubber stamp. He pushed back hard, consistently, with very specific financial concerns because that was his job and he took it seriously. But as usual, Walt was undeterred, right? He started pouring his own personal money into the project and made it clear that he would build Disneyland with or without the company's backing. And eventually, Roy came around. And when he did, he moved fast. He went to ABC and negotiated a television deal that funded the park's construction, which is essentially the deal that basically launched the modern relationship between Hollywood and network TV. And the minute that it was clear Disneyland would succeed, Roy moved quickly to buy out every outside partner and bring the whole thing back under the company's control. And so Roy, on Walt during all of this, said, "To the bankers who financed us, I'm sure he seemed like a wild man hell-bent for bankruptcy. To me, he was my amazing kid brother full of impractical dreams that he made come true." And that one line tells you everything about how Roy held the tension, right? Walt was genuinely risky. The bankers weren't wrong. And Roy's faith in him wasn't naivete. It was a considered, experienced, informed belief in his brother's ability to turn the impossible into the real. And for most small business owners, the most valuable person on your team isn't someone who agrees with everything that you say, right? It's someone who will tell you honestly when they think you're wrong. And then once you've made the call, will go build it like it was their idea. That combination is the rarest thing in the world. Naturally, Walt got the statue at the center of the park, and Roy got a bench, only at Disney World. It's quiet. It's unremarkable if you don't know what you're looking at, and most people just walk right past it. But that statue is Roy's whole leadership story. He never needed to be in the center. He never needed the credit. He never needed his name on the building or the park or the company. He just needed the dream to survive. And it did, because he was there in the room doing the work, making the calls, standing up for his own brother, even after a 3-day screaming match, right? Even from a hospital bed, and even at 73 years old when he could have finally and rightfully rested. And Walt said it once about Roy as a kid. Roy was the one who would always see that Ruth and I had a toy. Roy didn't have much money, but by gosh, he always saw that we had a toy. He was really a kind-hearted guy. And Roy even said it once about himself when someone called him a skinflint for all of the times that he'd pushed back on Walt's spending. He said, "I've been made the skinflint, but I really wasn't. All I've been trying to do is help Walt do what he was trying to do." That's it. That's the whole thing. And so for small business owners building something right now, you are going to need a Roy. You might already have one and not know it. You might have someone on your team right now who's showing up quietly, completely, without needing the spotlight, right? Running the thing that needs to be run and protecting you in ways that you don't even see. Betting on your vision even when they have their own doubts about it. And if that person is in your building or your vicinity or whatever, that's the most important human that you work with. And so they deserve to hear you say so, out loud, specifically, in a way that makes it clear you actually see them. Walt said it best. He said, "I was lucky. I had an older brother, and he's still with me, and I still love him. I argue with him. Sometimes I think he's the most stubborn guy I've ever met in my life, but I don't know what the hell I'd do without him." Roy wasn't just a number two. Roy was the reason any of the dream was real. So that bench off to the side, right? The quiet man next to Minnie Mouse, that's not a consolation prize. That is the whole story. Go call your Roy, and I'll see you in the next one.